LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the September 15th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you like what I'm doing, because, as usual, I picked out the best. This week it's dozen most newsworthy, informative clips from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States, for what should be a really educational, fair use media criticism and political commentary show for you all tonight. I do have one political comedy clip I'll get to in a moment from Bill Maher's monologue about the Democratic debate. By the way, down in the video description, there's a link to my debate clip roundup that I did Friday afternoon from Thursday night's debate. I picked out the 13 best clips from the debate and added my commentary and criticism. I also put time indexes and descriptions of each of the 13 clips. So if you go to that video, you can read the 13 clips, the descriptions I've written of each of the 13 clips, and then go between the different clips or just watch the clips you want to watch, including the famous one where Biden said that you could automatically buy into his plan, then later in the next clip argued with Julian Castro as to whether he said buy-in or not. And that's actually the first of the three topics, and it's the topic of Bill Maher's monologue clip that I'm going to show you. It's the aftermath of the 2020 Democratic debate. I think I might have written Democratic twice here. Democratic debate. I'll fix that for the recorded show viewers. Also for the recorded show viewers, down in the video description, my three topics, you'll see time indexes and you can click between those links. The second topic is Trump administration topics. John Bolton left as Iran problems are, I guess, increasing with this bombing of the oil refinery in Saudi Arabia. Also, Rand Paul and Liz Cheney got in an argument over John Bolton leaving, the National Security Advisor, who was like the most hawkish member of the administration. And then there'll be one clip at the end of that topic about Adam Schiff and his subpoena of the Director of National Intelligence over this whole whistleblower violation, which could actually be the biggest story that got kind of the least play. And then there was this breaking story over the weekend about Brett Kavanaugh, Supreme Court Justice. The New York Times printed an article about a book that's coming out this week. I actually pre-ordered the book. I'm getting the book, about how Brett Kavanaugh's allegations were not really well investigated. Stay tuned. Those are the last two clips. For people who watched my live clip roundups about a year ago when Kavanaugh was up for nomination, you know that I have the strange coincidence of having lived in the same freshman dorm building with Brett Kavanaugh during the time that his supposed misconduct at Yale in his freshman year at Lawrence Hall. I was not only in the same freshman class with Brett Kavanaugh, but I was in the same residential college, and so I obviously have some strong opinions, and I've followed that closely, and I'll talk about that at the end. But that's the three topics. I think I've talked about pretty much everything that's down in the video description, except, my clip list. If you want to follow along with my dozen clip list here, these are the notes I use for myself. And if you want to follow along with that, and you can kind of tell what's happening in each clip, who's talking, what the topic is. And with that, I will get to the Bill Maher monologue clip talking about the fallout from the Democratic debate. If you're following along on my clip list, you know he talks about ageism and whether Biden really slipped, or, well, he doesn't really talk about the Castro thing at all. He talks about something at the end, although he does make sort of an ageist joke. And he talks about Andrew Yang. I will have an Andrew Yang clip, and a Ted Cruz clip, and an Amy Klobuchar clip, and a Kellyanne Conway clip, and this introduction has gone on long enough, so I will get to the first clip over here.
Beto went hard on guns. Did you see that? He said, hell yes. He said, hell yes, we're going to take away your AK-47. And when he said AK-47, Joe Biden said, bingo. I tell you, look, I always say ageism is not good. You have to take case-by-case basis. But Joe, I'm sorry, he's the one who got it. He looked pretty good until the end, and then he answered a question about slavery reparations. We're talking about teachers' pay and Venezuela and record players. It was like watching a really old dog try to get up on the couch. Record players? Yes, because he's hip. He's into vinyl. Joke's on you, millennials. That's not what it is. No, look, but Bernie Sanders is even older. Nobody makes any jokes about his age. It's not an issue with him because he doesn't act old. You know, it's not the years, it's the mileage. Bernie owns it. He's like, I care about the Constitution because I wrote the damn Constitution. Now, thankfully, nobody on the stage really went after Obama this time. They went after Trump, yes. Good strategy. Amy Klobuchar said the country's being ruled by a game show host, and Andrew Yang said, exactly, and we can't have that, which is why I'm offering every family in America $1,000.
And so I ended with the Andrew Yang joke to remind myself to tell you what I already told you before the clip, that I do have an Andrew Yang interview clip coming up. If you're following along on the clip list, that will be clip number 5, where Jake Tapper actually asks Andrew Yang about this argument he got, an online argument he was getting into with a new Saturday Night Live cast member who made some anti-Asian slurs, and I thought it's kind of an interesting contrast to what you just saw. What is it with Bill Maher? He speaks out against ageism and then makes ageist jokes, but I guess there's that whole thing, well, I'm not making fun of Bernie for it. Well, he does make fun of Bernie for being old too, and he actually made a old joke about Bernie, but I don't know. Some of those jokes were okay, although actually one of the most interesting things I saw this week was I watched the Late Show with Stephen Colbert. I recorded on my TiVo, and I actually add in like an extra half hour and watch the James Corden show, the Late Late Show, which in a lot of ways I think is one of the best. I actually really enjoy James Corden. And he took on Bill Maher this week, and I don't have any clips from that, but he did this whole thing about fat shaming that is definitely worth watching and got a bunch of coverage. But I think Bill Maher spent a lot of time on the Democratic debate, and for some reason the news programs I think may have overcovered that. I'm going to show you 4 news summaries now. 3 of them are basically on the Democratic debate. And then I'll show you a 4th news summary when I get to the next topic. That'll be the Fox News summary, where I'm actually thinking that Fox News may have covered the news better because they talked about the conflict with Iran and the Saudi Arabian refinery getting blown up. And that did come up on the other news programs, just not in their news summaries, which were all sort of focused on the Democratic debates, which, I mean, was a story, but not necessarily the biggest story, and certainly not the only story of the week for your news summary. But here's about 3 minutes, 45 seconds of news summary from Chuck Todd this week, where you'll see him talk about the 3 frontrunners are pretty much the same, and they kind of increasing their lead. And then he goes to the pre-recorded package about the ageism issue and the Castro attack. And one thing, and I'll talk about this afterwards, I thought the fact-checking on the Julian Castro versus Joe Biden attack in most of the media was way off. They basically said that the facts didn't back up Julian Castro, which is totally not true, but I'll discuss all of that a little more after we watch this 3 minute 46 second news summary from NBC News' Meet the Press this morning, where they pretty much said Julian Castro was wrong over here.
Good Sunday morning. To quote the great Yogi Berra, it's getting late early out there. Yes, there were still 10 candidates at Thursday's debate, and yes, there may be even more at the next one. But for now, at least, it feels as if we have a top three: Bernie Sanders, Joe Biden, and Elizabeth Warren. True, there still are 141 days until the first votes are cast in Iowa. But if anything, the gap between the frontrunners and the rest of the field only seemed to grow on Thursday evening, with Biden dominating the party's moderates and Warren and Sanders fighting for the progressives. The Democratic race has turned into a contest between incrementalism and structural change, between the inside game and the change the game insurgents, between presumed electability and loftier aspirational vision. So did anyone win? Well, here's one take. Elizabeth Warren won the Democratic primary debate, exciting the progressive left, while Joe Biden won the general election debate, offering the safe alternative to President Trump, despite some verbal stumbles and an unsubtle reference to his age.
I don't view it as anything. I think he just got his facts wrong.
Joe Biden deflecting questions about his age after this attack by Julian Castro on whether his health care plan automatically enrolls the uninsured.
They do not have to buy in. They do not have to buy in.
You just said that. You just said that 2 minutes ago. You just said 2 minutes ago that they would have to buy in. You said they would have to buy in.
Have to buy in. If she qualifies for Medicaid,
are you forgetting what you said 2 minutes ago?
It's not clear Castro's attack was correct on the substance, and it certainly appeared to backfire, with other candidates quick to defend Biden.
I thought that was so personal and so unnecessary.
You think it was fair to suggest if Joe Biden has lost it?
No.
Castro is denying that he was implying Biden is declining with age.
What I was pointing out was that he had denied saying the words buy-in, even though he did say the words buy-in.
Other candidates have carefully brought up the age question.
There's a lot of people who are concerned about Joe Biden's ability to carry the ball all the way across the end line without fumbling.
Before pulling it back.
Forgive me if my football metaphor about fumbling the ball is being taken out of context, but the reality is I want to get into the end zone.
While wounding Castro, the line of attack could also hurt Biden by giving a permission slip to critics who want to put his age in the center of the debate.
How do you ultimately overcome this?
Carry the ball over the finish line.
Releasing your medical records to address concerns by...
I don't have what the hell concerns, man. You want to wrestle?
On Friday, Biden pledged to release his medical records before the Iowa caucuses. Though Biden struggled at times, especially on issues of race.
Play the radio. Make sure the television, make sure you have the record player on at night. The phone. Make sure the kids hear words.
So far, Biden's general election argument has been durable. With the debate shifting leftward in the primary, Biden is challenging Warren and Sanders on the cost of their health care proposals.
Will middle-class taxes go up? Will private insurance be eliminated?
Look, what families have to deal with is cost, total cost.
I don't doubt their motives, but it's going to cost over $3.4 trillion a year. How can that possibly be done without raising taxes?
And questioning Beto O'Rourke's proposed mandatory buyback of assault weapons.
Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not going to allow it to be used against our fellow Americans anymore.
I frankly think that clip will be played for years
Oh, I cut off the very end of that. I apologize for that. But I think you got pretty much the gist of that. Oh, I'm got a cat to the right of me and a dog to the left of me, and here I am. Anyway, this happened during my debate clip roundup. Actually, I even took a picture of it, and that's what I wanted to really criticize NBC News's Meet the Press on there. If you watch my debate clip roundup at a link I put down in the video description, this is the thumbnail I actually made out of 3 different photos. You will see clip number 2 is what Biden said about his plan the 2 times he spoke before he was criticized by Julian Castro, and you'll hear him specifically say that you can automatically buy in, and then later he says you can automatically join. I mean, what Julian Castro said was actually correct, and you just saw NBC News' Meet the Press say that he might not be right on the substance, and it seems like most of the fact checkers said Julian Castro was wrong when he was right, which, like I said, if you go watch my top 10 debate clip roundup, you'll see my analysis where I said that Julian Castro was right, even though I said I think that the attack hurt both Joe Biden and Julian Castro, and I thought the big winners of the debate were Lindsey Davis, one of the moderators, and Elizabeth Warren. There was actually, I think it wasn't on ABC that they had I'll talk about that a little bit later. I'm going to check my facts on which news program had Elizabeth Warren as the winner of the debate in terms of polling after the debate. It was on ABC, but before I do that, I want to show you a couple more news summaries on the Democratic debates. Like I said, 3 of the CBS's Face the Nation didn't do a news summary. Fox News concentrated on like foreign policy stuff, and even though they have their bias, I think they actually concentrated on the bigger news story, or at least not the sole news story shouldn't have been the debate. As I said before I showed that previous clip, at least the news summaries from ABC and CNN were shorter. Here's the ABC news summary, just a little over 30 seconds from George Stephanopoulos this morning over here.
Good morning and welcome to This Week. The top 10 Democratic contenders shared the same stage for the first time Thursday night. Who won, who lost, how much changed, not entirely clear. Probably the way it should be, still 5 months from the first votes. What is clear, the ideological and political debate that divides this field is far from settled. The candidates and the Democratic voters are now vying for all want to defeat President Trump. What it takes to win, what comes next, the big open questions. 2 of the candidates are here today. We begin with the mayor of South Bend, Pete Buttigieg. Mayor, thank you for joining us this morning.
And I actually don't have a Pete Buttigieg clip, although I do have, like I said, I've got Amy Klobuchar, I've got Ted Cruz, I've got Rand Paul and Liz Cheney and Adam Schiff, and of course Andrew Yang is coming up in the one news clip in this category, clip after next. Before I get to that, I want to show you one more news summary. This is the CNN State of the Union news summary, where Jake Tapper told us that our State of the Union this week is watching for the fallout of the Democratic debate. Kind of saying the same thing you heard in the last news summary, that it's unlikely to change anything, but Biden is facing questions about his medical records, and Julian Castro actually, they show a clip in the CNN State of the Union news summary of one of Julian Castro's backers backing out, and I will talk about that a little more with you after we watch that final news summary together over here.
Tapper in Washington, where the State of our Union is watching the fallout. The Democratic presidential candidates are back on the campaign trail this weekend after a debate that seemed unlikely to knock the 3 frontrunners out of the lead. The Democrat leading in the polls, Vice President Joe Biden, is, however, facing renewed personal scrutiny about his sharpness and vigor after the debate. He has now pledged to release his medical records before any votes are cast. This after former Housing Secretary Julian Castro appeared to question the former vice president's mind and memory in perhaps the most consequential exchange of the debate. Castro now says his comments were not meant as veiled attacks on Biden's age, 76, but the moment created an opening for other candidates to take on the sensitive topic. And in the wake of the debate, we're learning that Castro is now losing one of his 3 congressional endorsements. Democratic Congressman Vicente Gonzalez of Texas told me just moments ago he is pulling his endorsement from Castro and giving it to Vice President Joe Biden. Gonzalez said it's time for Democrats to narrow the field.
Well, I think at this point in time, we need to narrow the field and unite as Democrats to defeat Trump in November 2020. And that's why I believe I'm moving my support to Vice President Joe Biden.
We're going to air more of that interview later this hour. Joining me now, Democratic President.
And who's the Democratic presidential candidate talking to Jake Tapper there? It might be Andrew Yang. I can't remember who the first one was, but Andrew Yang is going to be talking to Jake Tapper in the next clip I show. But before I get to that, the one thing I wanted to say about those news summaries, I was trying to remember which poll showed that Elizabeth Warren won and that Julian Castro did worse, and it was a 538 poll. Nate Silver's website, 538. Well, Nate Silver was on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. You can see the full ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos program. It'll link down in the video description, along with the source of just about all the clips that I'm showing you. But before I leave the Democratic debate topic, I want to show a clip of one of the Democrats who did better in the polls after the debate. All the lower tier candidates except for Julian Castro did better, apparently, including Andrew Yang. And I know Andrew Yang has a very robust online following, so much so that I think it's spilled over into the comments on my channel. Like, I get a lot of Yang Gang comments whenever I talk about Andrew Yang, and maybe that will happen because I put Andrew Yang as one of the two newsmakers in the title of my live clip roundup this week. But Andrew Yang was talking about something kind of interesting. It's great having an Asian American presidential candidate to talk about that aspect of discrimination. In the last, I think it was last weekend, the Saturday of last weekend, I saw this performance of this play, Hold These Truths, about Gordon Hirabayashi, who's a Japanese American during World War II who was a protester against the curfew and the evacuation order, along with Fred Korematsu, who was more famous. It was one of the companion cases with the Korematsu case, and so I'm glad to see anti-Asian discrimination highlighted in this next clip. And I often start my Sunday clip roundups during the season that has Saturday Night Live playing the night before my Sunday live clip roundup. I will often take clips from Saturday Night Live, and apparently one of the new cast members is an Asian American of Chinese ancestry. But another one of the cast members has engaged in these anti-Asian slurs, including calling Andrew Yang an anti-Asian slur. And Andrew Yang has talked about this extensively online in the last 24 hours, and Jake Tapper asked him about it over in the clip I will talk about with you a little more after we watch it together over here.
He is in real life.
I want to ask you about something that you tweeted about at length this weekend. One of the three new cast members for Saturday Night Live, a guy named Shane Gillis from Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, he offered what I think critics would call a half-hearted apology for having used racial slurs in his act, specifically against Asian Americans, including specifically against you. Now, you tweeted yesterday about what it feels like to be called these horrific racial slurs, but you also said that you forgive the comedian and you hope others can as well. As one of the most prominent Asian American political figures, did you feel any special responsibility to try to reflect what others in the Asian American community are feeling, or were you just speaking for yourself?
Well, there have been a number of reactions to my call for forgiving Shane Gillis, and I've experienced a lot of anti-Asian racism throughout my upbringing, and it hurts, and it's something that's very real, and I do think anti-Asian racial epithets are not taken as seriously as slurs against other groups. But at the same time, bigger picture, I believe that our country has become excessively punitive and vindictive about remarks that people find offensive or racist, and that we need to try and move beyond that if we can, particularly in a case where the person, is in this case, to me, like a comedian whose words should be taken in a slightly different light.
I've heard from Asian Americans, I'm sure you have too, who say that some of your joking references to being Asian American on stage, about how you know math, about how you know a lot of doctors, feed into stereotypes, and they resent that as well, while obviously it's not the same level as what that comedian is accused of doing. What are your feelings on that?
Well, the Asian American community is very diverse, and certainly I would never claim that my individual experience would speak to the depth and breadth of our community. At the same time, I think Americans are very smart and that they can actually see right through that kind of myth. And if anything, by poking fun at it, I'm making Americans reflect a little bit more on them.
California Governor Gavin Newsom is weighing whether he should sign a bill.
So I don't know. I really appreciate having Andrew Yang as a person to respond to these issues, like I was saying before I showed the clip. Although, I don't know, who am I to judge Andrew Yang for some of the things he says in the debates that basically reinforce positive ethnic stereotypes about Asians. I have a Jewish background, and there's some positive or semi-positive stereotypes about Jews. Can I make jokes about that? And it would be. I don't think reinforcing stereotypes is good from anyone. But he can something like he can do it. It's like the N-word that certain people can say because they're the recipients of the victimization, or I don't know. You have to tell me the rules, but I think that guy on SNL did not do a good apology, and Andrew Yang went into excruciating, intimate detail on Twitter as to how he was slurred growing up because he was Asian. Remember the whole there's nothing wrong with my hands controversy from the Republican primaries 4 years ago? Well, Andrew Yang kind of went there. I don't want to go into all the details with the anti-Asian discrimination he faced growing up, but thankfully that didn't come up in Jake Tapper's CNN interview. And anyway, so that's the last clip in the Democratic debate fallout topic. So now I'm going to move on to the next topic, where I have 5 clips, and that's sort of the Trump administration, the weekend Trump topic. I'm just thankful that there were other topics other than Trump this week, because it seems my video live clip roundups every Sunday seem to center so much on Trump. But there were a few Trump, and I guess the Kavanaugh topic also has something to do with Trump because he was appointed by Trump, and that's the last 2 clips. But the clips in this topic are mostly about the firing of, or John Bolton said he quit, but Trump said he was fired, and about that issue and what happened with the supposed either the Iranian bombing of the Saudi refinery, or maybe it was Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen, or that's kind of, well, you'll see it's all covered in this news summary. Like I said earlier, Fox News was the only channel that focused on this issue, the recent foreign policy news in the news summary and what happened with John Bolton. Didn't mention Kavanaugh, of course. None of the news summaries mentioned Kavanaugh. Maybe that was too breaking. Although there'll be a brief news summary when I show the first of the 2 clips from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, which thankfully covered a little bit. But the one thing about this news summary, they talk about the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, and all of a sudden he's like a respected figure again after he was responsible for kidnapping a Washington Post journalist who was a U.S. resident in the Saudi Arabian embassy in Turkey. That somehow that just seeing him come up in this news summary, that kind of disturbed me. Oh, and Chris Wallace is not the host this week. It's Bill Hemmer, who is definitely one of the more lightweight journalists at Fox News, in my opinion. And then over to Kevin Corke, and I'll talk about that news summary a little more with you after we watch it together over here.
And hello again from Fox News in Washington. We begin with the drone attacks on key Saudi Arabian oil facilities, raising concerns about the global oil supply and world energy prices. Iranian-backed rebels in Yemen claiming responsibility, but President Trump's top diplomat, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, placing the blame squarely on Iran. In a moment, we'll speak exclusively with White House counselor Kellyanne Conway. But first, the latest from Kevin Corke, who's live on the North Lawn of the White House with us on this Sunday. Kevin.
Bill, the president said after those attacks he spoke with the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman. He offered U.S. support and vowed that America would keep oil markets stable and well supplied. Reassuring words from Washington amid an unfolding drama half a world away. Its aftermath could be seen for miles as Yemeni Houthi rebels took credit for knocking out more than half of Saudi Arabia's oil output over the weekend. Despite the group's claims, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo blamed Iran, writing on Twitter that there was no evidence the attacks came from Yemen. Iran's foreign minister shot back, Javad Zarif tweeting, having failed at max pressure, Secretary Pompeo's turning to max deceit. And a Revolutionary Guard commander saying American bases and aircraft carriers in the region are within range of Iranian missiles. The attacks stoking fears that tensions between Washington and Tehran have now reached their highest levels since the Iranian hostage crisis of 1979, and comes just days ahead of a gathering of world leaders at the UN General Assembly in New York and a possible meeting between President Trump and Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, a meeting that would have seemed far less likely before the sudden departure this week of former National Security Advisor John Bolton, whose hawkish tendencies were believed to be frequently at odds with President Trump's own sensibilities. Among those said to be on the long list of possible replacements, top hostage negotiator Robert O'Brien, special envoy for Iran Brian Hook, and German Ambassador Rick Grinnell, who attended a White House dinner last night with the family of Otto Warmbier, the American college student who died in 2017 after being held captive in North Korea for more than a year. Bill, the White House hasn't said what prompted that dinner, although publicly the Warmbier family previously was critical of the president's suggestion that North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un was unaware of Warmbier's deteriorating condition. Bill?
Kevin Corke reporting from the White House. Kevin, thank you. Joining us now.
So, like I said, there was some subtle bias maybe in that reporting, and this is one of those weeks where I'm saying that maybe Fox News covered a story more important than those last news summaries you saw in the last topic about the Democratic debate. I mean, you know, Saudi oil fields going up in flames with, what is it, like 50% of their oil production, 5% of the world's oil production is going up in flames in pictures you saw in that last report. I mean, that's important. Although, it's kind of weird because John Bolton left and he was the most like hawkish person. One of the reasons he left was because he didn't want Trump to meet with someone from Iran at this UN meeting coming up next week, and that topic came up in. Well, I'm going to show a clip of Kellyanne Conway next, and I'm not going to show her talking about that, but I am going to show. And I know people don't like Kellyanne, even like listening to Kellyanne Conway that much. It's only a 2-minute clip. It's just, 2 minutes, 11 seconds. And this is the clip where I'm going to back up what I said before that last clip about Bill Hemmer being a lightweight. And I find this really amusing because Bill Hemmer gives Kellyanne Conway one of the most softball questions. And you know, I usually like to show Kellyanne Conway clips on the other networks where she's challenged, and you usually get because it's always a question, how does a news anchor treat someone who is just like spouting lie after spin, after dodge, after misdirection, after change of subject, after red herring, she's just like a misinformation machine, right? And the fact that she's a misinformation machine in some ways is also highlighted by this softball question from Bill Hemmer, because you'll see he I'm looking at my clip list. If you want to read my clip list, this is clip number 7, where Bill Hemmer, shows this Trump clip from one of his helicopter chopper talk, as Stephen Colbert says on his Late Show, and you'll see in the answer, Kellyanne Conway, one of the things she says that's totally bogus is that Trump is one of the most transparent administrations ever because he has these press availabilities, and because he does it in front of a helicopter almost all the time, where because of the way the audio works and the microphones, you really can only hear what he's saying, not what the journalists are saying. And so you can't really hear the questions, and he can choose what question he wants to answer, and he can choose whether people get follow-ups. Remember, they don't do press conferences anymore, and so that's one of the things Bill Hemmer never follows up on, as you'll see, because I'm going to play this all the way through to his follow-up question, which is worthless. But the most amusing thing about this that I was saying before, and it showing that Kellyanne Conway is like a misinformation machine, is that Bill Hemmer asked this softball question showing the Trump clip saying, I'm great to work with. There are many people who want John Bolton's job because everyone loves working with me. And why? It's because it's so easy. I make all the decisions. That's the clip you're going to see. And but Bill Hemmer's question is just does he have a strong enough team around him? But Kellyanne Conway, you'll see the beginning of her answer is, I've heard those stories. I've heard those stories, even though Bill Hemmer never mentions any stories about Trump's management style being crazy or that people hate working for him. Although, if you are paying attention to the U.S. media, you know that there are many news stories about Trump's management style being crazy, and that everyone who leaves, or most of the people who leave, eventually say that, inside the White House, people hate working for him. So Bill Hemmer never asks about that, but you'll see at the beginning of Kellyanne Conway's answer, she's responding to a confrontational question that Bill Hemmer never asked over in this clip.
Bolton this week is gone. There's a job opening in the West Wing. Here is how the president described his management style just 3 days ago.
A lot of people want the job, and it's a great job. It's great because it's a lot of fun to work with Donald Trump, and it's very easy, actually, to work with him. You know why it's easy? Because I make all the decisions and I have to work.
We know he is confident, but with the level of turnover, does he have enough of a team around him, Kellyanne?
He does indeed, and I've heard these stories again and again from day one. I've been there from day one. And the fact is, what the president just described is part of the transparency and accountability that he allows himself as president and commander-in-chief every single day. We've never had a president so accessible to the press and indeed the public, Bill, on an ongoing basis. He engages in social media regularly. He gives these press avails. And what he said there is exactly right. But let me walk back a couple. Before the president makes the decisions, I can tell you, as someone who's in there daily in front of him, he invites dissenting opinion. He not just accepts, he expects disagreement and diversity of viewpoints. I've seen on any number of issues, including national security and foreign policy. And then he weighs the consequences, hears everybody out, reads the briefing papers, thinks about it, meets with different teams, and then he makes the decision. Do you know why? Because in the entire West Wing, actually in the entire Trump-Pence administration, only 2 people were elected to anything, and their names are Donald J. Trump and Michael R. Pence. So we are there to give our counsel and put out all the consequences. And I think the president is also a great reader of when people have personal agendas. When they're not thinking about the American interests, they're thinking of their own personal interests.
Did John Bolton,
many of them have survived. A lot of them couldn't get through the door.
Was John Bolton in that category?
No, that's not a comment about him. No, that is not a comment about
when will we get an answer as to...
thanked for his service.
When do we get an answer on who
John
replaces
Bolton and Donald
John
Trump were aligned on many different issues. Maybe as soon as this week or the next week, the president
So I pretty much pre-criticized that clip, and there was no real follow-up from Bill Hemmer, as you saw there. The one thing that Kellyanne Conway said that I can't believe she gets away with saying, she said, Trump, he reads the briefing papers. How many people think he reads the briefing papers? Anyone? Bueller? No. I think that was pretty much a flat-out lie. But in addition to the criticisms I talked about before, I showed the Kellyanne Conway clip, and it was because there wasn't a big fight with Bill Hemmer, the non-journalist, Trump TV, Fox News, mouthpiece, I guess you would call him. I think in a previous program, I talked about how he was, the only positive thing I could say about Bill Hemmer is that he's turning the word bimbo into a gender-neutral term, maybe. Himbo? Anyway. And anyway, that's the Kellyanne Conway clip, which at least because Bill Hemmer is not very confrontational, was pretty short, just a little over 2 minutes. And then these next two clips are about this other thing that happened on the right wing of American politics because of John Bolton's resignation. It created this fight between, who do you choose sides when, it's like Godzilla versus Mothra and you're Tokyo. You could try to choose sides, but the one thing is a lot of buildings are going down, and I actually can choose sides in the Liz Cheney versus Rand Paul argument that broke out after John Bolton's resignation / firing. And there are very few things that are going to make me take the side of Rand Paul, but I've talked about Rand Paul many times over the years, and I agree with maybe 33%, 40% of the things he says, which is better than most Republicans because he has this libertarian streak, even though it's not very consistent. And this, some people call it isolationism. I think he calls it non-interventionism. And so he's and some people say Trump has some of those same tendencies. And so there was two clips I want to show you here from they're both from one is from CNN State of the Union, one's from NBC News's Meet the Press. Rand Paul was on State of the Union, and Liz Cheney, apparently Rand Paul's new nemesis, was on Meet the Press with Chuck Todd. So first here is Jake Tapper on CNN State of the Union showing some of the tweets, giving sort of an introduction of what happened, and then asking Rand Paul about the fight, and Rand Paul explaining, I'm kind of on Rand Paul's side here, which doesn't happen all that often, but more often, I guess, than most Republicans, and I'll talk about that a little more after we watch that 2.5-minute clip together over here.
Welcome back to State of the Union. I'm Jake Tapper. President Trump didn't even take part in perhaps the nastiest political fight on Twitter this week when Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky criticized the number 3 House Republican, Congresswoman Liz Cheney of Wyoming, over her support for, quote, endless wars, and accused her of not being supportive enough of President Trump's goal of pulling U.S. troops out of Afghanistan. Cheney tweeted back, calling Paul a, quote, big loser whose motto is terrorist first, and it went on from there. Joining me now, Kentucky Republican Senator Rand Paul. Senator Paul, good to see you. You're also the author of an upcoming book, we should point out, The Case Against Socialism, which comes out next month. Congratulations on that. We'll have you back to talk about it. I want to start with this feud between you and Congresswoman Cheney, because I assume you think this is more and about something more important than just two members of Congress bickering.
Yeah, no, I think this is a big issue, whether or not we should stay in Afghanistan. I can't meet a general who can clearly tell me what our national security interest is in Afghanistan. most of the military, over 60% of the military who served in Iraq or Afghanistan, now think both of the wars should come to an end. So I think the president's right to do this, but I think we have to call out the Republicans who are preventing him. This is the Bolton Cheney wing. Dick Cheney, to this day, still thinks the Iraq war was a good thing. The Iraq war, President Trump has said, was the biggest geopolitical blunder of the last generation. It destabilized the Middle East. It increased the strength of Iran. It tipped the balance towards Iran. So it really was nothing good about the Iraq war. And Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney, John Bolton, they still don't get it. They still are advocating for more regime change in the Middle East.
The back and forth between you and Liz Cheney went even further when you took the fight to her home turf. You called into a Wyoming TV station. Let me just ask you, there's an open Senate seat in Wyoming next year. People are talking about Cheney running. Would you prefer that a different Republican fill that Senate seat?
Well, you know, one of the reasons we called into Wyoming is there are two state representatives who wrote an op-ed that we ended up retweeting and sending about. And in their op-ed, they criticized Liz Cheney for always criticizing the president when he wants people to pay more at NATO, when he wants less troops overseas, or when he wants less war. Liz Cheney criticized him every time. That was the main reason for calling in. But yes, there is a Senate race. I'm supporting Cynthia Lummis, who is a former congressman, conservative congressman. That's the only person that I know of in the race at this point.
Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen.
So I just kept that playing a little bit there so you could see that Jake Tapper on CNN State of the Union did talk about what happened with the supposed attack by Iranian-backed Houthi rebels on Saudi Arabia, although that's still a developing story. But you saw there Rand Paul. This is one of those rare occasions where I agree with the large majority of what Rand Paul said in that last clip. And there aren't a lot of clips where I can say that, but it's true more for Rand Paul than most Republicans because of his libertarian streak. And if you want to see the dark side of the Republican Party, you know, they used to say that Dick Cheney was the Darth Vader of the George W. Bush administration. I even have like a video about that with a Jon Stewart Daily Show clip about Dick Cheney being the Darth Vader of the, both Darth Vader, and then I think they also used the Eye of Sauron from the Lord of the Rings series. So it was like a both fantasy and science fiction evil montage, I guess, from the Daily Show on the whole. I mean, what an evil dynasty we get from the Cheney family, because it's not just Dick Cheney. Now you'll see here we have Liz Cheney showing the dark side of the Republican Party in this Rand Paul. For, you know, I said Rand Paul shows what very few things I can agree on from a Republican, and you're not going to get it from Liz Cheney, and you're getting a lot of dodging. And I don't think Jake Tapper, sorry, not Jake Tapper, this is Chuck Todd on NBC News' Meet the Press, doesn't really follow up on, you know, he asks a good question about, you know, why is Liz Cheney calling Rand Paul pro-terrorist? That's, I mean, that's so Cheney that, you know, you're either with us or you're against us. Well, that's George W. Bush, or, you know, but this is it's a total dodge from Liz Cheney. Not much of follow up from Jake Tapper, but at least he asked. I mean, why do I keep saying Jake Tapper? It's Chuck Todd. Not much of a follow up from Chuck Todd, but at least he asked Liz Cheney the question you can see over here.
All business. And let me ask you to respond to the fact to it this way. Washington Examiner headline: Liz Cheney slimes Rand Paul as supporting terrorists because he opposes war. And essentially, it's criticizing you, the writer's criticizing you for basically saying she should engage with Senator Paul on the merits of his ideas, not slander him as pro-terrorism. It's using the words calling somebody pro-terrorist. Do you admit that that's probably a little overboard?
Look, I think if you look back at what Senator Paul has said over many, many years, he's very different from where President Trump is on these issues. President Trump puts America first. Senator Paul, whenever given the opportunity, blames America first. If you look at what he said about, why we were attacked on 9/11, if you look at what he said, he's blamed America even for World War II. President Trump doesn't believe that. Senator Paul does. And look, I think fundamentally at the end of the day, this is about substance and policy. And Senator Paul tried to get elected president. He was able to get only less than 5% of the vote in the Iowa caucuses, as you well know. His views are not views that are shared widely, certainly among Republicans and among the American people as a whole. And they're dangerous views as well.
Are you running for the Senate?
Pardon me?
Are you running for the Senate?
I have not got any announcements to make this morning, Chuck.
So you can see Liz Cheney there is not announcing running for the Senate, so Rand Paul was right about there being only one Republican running for the Senate in Wyoming. Why should I care? I couldn't really tell you, but like I said, that is a clear delineation between the few things in the non-interventionist, some say isolationist wing of the Republican Party, the few things I can agree with in that wing versus the total dark side, Dick Cheney, Liz Cheney, George W. Bush, John Bolton, neocon, let's invade Iraq, let's, turn the Middle East into our oil-producing Halliburton paradise type. Well, anyway, I think you get the idea. And so that's the Rand Paul versus Liz Cheney clips that I promised. And before I leave the Week in Trump topic, the last clip I want to show you is what may be the biggest story. It's still kind of developing. I saw this on breaking late on Friday, and that's late on Friday is sometimes where the biggest stories break, where people are trying to hide them. And this is a story about how the Trump administration is defying a law that says when there's a whistleblower in the intelligence community that gives a credible report to the Inspector General, that report has to be given to the Congressional Oversight Committee for Intelligence within 10 days by the Director of National Intelligence from the Trump administration. But somehow that law is being defied on the advice of the Trump administration Justice Department, i.e. Trump Toady and Trump Roy Cohn, Bill Barr, the Attorney General of the United States, supposedly, but the guy who's acting like he's Trump's personal attorney and not the Attorney General of the United States, in my opinion. And that is leading to the breaking news at the beginning of the weekend that Adam Schiff is serving a subpoena on Trump's Director of National Intelligence for not providing more information about this whistleblower who's saying that either Trump or someone very close to Trump is threatening national security with their handling of classified intelligence material. And we don't really know much more about what it is or who it is, but the most we know is represented in this clip here from, this is CBS's Face the Nation, Margaret Brennan, to her credit, asking Adam Schiff about this issue this morning over here.
I want to ask you about some work you're doing here at home, which was you issued a subpoena on Friday for the acting director of intelligence, alleging he's withholding a whistleblower disclosure, possibly to protect President Trump. That's a pretty significant allegation here. We're putting up a quote on the screen from you. Have you gotten a response to this letter?
we've gotten a response, and the director has said essentially that he is answering to a higher authority and refusing to turn over the whistleblower complaint. This is deeply troubling. No
Just
director,
ignoring the subpoena.
Well, at this point, yes. Ignoring the subpoena, ignoring our request. No DNI, no Director of National Intelligence, has ever refused to turn over a whistleblower complaint. And here, Margaret, the significance is the Inspector General found this complaint to be urgent, found it to be credible. That is, they did some preliminary investigation, found the whistleblower to be credible. That suggests corroboration. And that it involved serious or flagrant wrongdoing. And according to the Director of National Intelligence, the reason he's not acting to provide it, even though the statute mandates that he do so, is because he is being instructed not to. That this involved a higher authority, someone above the DNI. Well, there are only a few people above the DNI. So we're concerned this involves wrongdoing that's under investigation by our committee. And we're going to do everything necessary to make sure that whistleblower is not allowed to provide the complaint to us, but can come directly to Congress, which the director is also prohibiting at this point.
So you don't know, but you suspect the president has some role, or the executive branch here. Can you tell us what the subject was of the whistleblower complaint?
I can't go into the contents, but I can tell you that, at least according to the Director of National Intelligence, this involves an issue of privileged communications. Now, that means it's a pretty narrow group of people that it could apply to, that are both above the DNI in authority and also involve privileged communications. So I think it's fair to assume this involves either the president or people around him or both. But at the end of the day, if the Director of National Intelligence is going to undermine the whistleblower protections, it means that people are going to end up taking the law into their own hands and going directly to the press instead of the mechanism that Congress set to protect classified information. And that gravely threatens both our national security as well as a system that encourages people to expose wrongdoing.
You're in leadership. There seems to be confusion within the Democratic Party about whether or not there is actually an impeachment inquiry underway. Can you close?
And so in addition to covering that issue that I showed in that last clip, I have to give kudos to CBS's Face the Nation and Margaret Brennan for asking about what happened with impeachment this week, which wasn't covered very extensively by most of the news programs. It was mostly CBS's Face the Nation and Fox News Sunday for some reason. I think Fox News has decided that impeachment, if it happens or to the extent that it happens at all, it helps Trump, and so they really want to cover impeachment to show how radical and extreme the Democrats are. But there is an impeachment investigation going on, as well there should be, and that's an issue I don't want to go into extensively or really at all. But I also want to give kudos to CBS's Face the Nation for covering that issue that I just talked about, or that was just in that clip, about there's supposedly some whistleblower and there's mishandling of classified information, and the Trump administration is refusing to hand over information in violation of the statute that covers whistleblowers in the intelligence community. And it's kind of reminiscent of the Trump administration refusal to turn over Trump tax returns when there's a statute that says that if it's requested by the chair of the appropriate congressional committee, the Secretary of the Treasury shall turn that over. And it's basically all this stonewalling, and I think that's why impeachment is a good idea. But even if it doesn't lead to removal. But anyway, that's the last of the clips I want to show you on the week in Trump. And now, so the final topic that I have two clips to show you on are the new allegations against Trump nominee to the Supreme Court and now Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. as I said at the beginning of the live stream, there's this weird coincidence that I actually went to college my freshman year, and that's where these allegations occurred back in 1983-84 in Lawrence Hall on Old Campus at Yale University. That's where I lived my freshman year. Well, that's where Brett Kavanaugh lived, and Deborah Ramirez also lived there. Someone who I vaguely remember, just like I vaguely remember Brett Kavanaugh, but I do remember the basement of Lawrence Hall, where I lived in the basement of Lawrence Hall in entryway A. Brett Kavanaugh lived in entryway D, and I do remember the excessive drinking and the vomit because one of my good friends was up on the higher floor of entryway D, and his roommate had switched with down to Brett Kavanaugh's room to be one of his roommates. And anyway, I followed this whole thing extensively, and I'm going to comment on it after I show you a couple clips. Amy Klobuchar and Ted Cruz. Yay to what Amy Klobuchar says, and Ted Cruz is a total dodge. It's like Blasey Ford, and totally ignoring Deborah Ramirez, who was another one of my Yale classmates, who was interviewed by the FBI about Brett Kavanaugh thrusting his penis in her face, and she was interviewed by the FBI, but she gave 25 witnesses to corroborate her story who were never interviewed. And you'll see Amy Klobuchar in this next clip talk about all the tips that were never followed up on. And of course, the White House controls it's part of the executive branch. So the FBI is part of the executive branch. So the White House controls the scope of their investigation, and they severely limited the investigation of witnesses about Brett Kavanaugh's misconduct when he was a student at Yale. All the corroborating witnesses for Deborah Ramirez never investigated. Multiple tips never investigated, as Amy Klobuchar tells George Stephanopoulos over in this clip.
Thanks, George.
And I want to begin with breaking news with you as well. It's on something you had direct involvement in as a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, the confirmation of Justice Kavanaugh. The New York Times has a new report out revealing a separate sexual allegation from his time at Yale that was not investigated by the FBI, and that the FBI failed to interview at least 25 people who may have had corroborating information on the allegations against Kavanaugh. Julian Castro put a tweet out on that overnight saying it's more clear than ever that Brett Kavanaugh lied under oath. He should be impeached, and Congress should review the failure of the Department of Justice to properly investigate the matter. Just a couple of minutes ago, the president weighed in as well, saying that the Democrats are telling lies about him. Kavanaugh should sue, and the Democrats are trying to influence his opinion. Do you believe this is grounds for impeachment? Should the Justice Department be reviewed?
My views on Justice Kavanaugh are very clear, George. I think most people remember my questioning of the justice when he went so far as to ask me if I blacked out and had to apologize to me. I strongly opposed him based on his views on executive power, which will continue to haunt our country, as well as how he behaved, including the allegations that we are hearing more about today. My concern here is that the process was a sham. I don't think you can look at impeachment hearings without getting the documents. The House would have to get the documents, and the Attorney General is shielding documents. If you recall, we were given this moment, just a few days, every other hour, to look at the documents related to other allegations that have been called in on the FBI tip line. I can't reveal what we saw, but I can tell you it was documents of this size, and you could only look at one copy while other senators were in there. And it was a mix, not triaged, nutty calls to a tip line mixed in with actual calls from people that seem to have information. I think the whole thing was a sham and that those documents need to be turned over, as well as the documents that the White House hid from his time in the White House counsel's office. All of that needs to come forward to even look at a proceeding like that. And to do any of this, George, you need a new president. You need a new attorney general that respects the law. And that is just not happening with this guy. So I go back to the fundamental case I made at the debate. I don't want to be the president for half America. I want to be the president for all of America. And to win and move this country forward on those things the mayor was just talking about, on climate change and some order in how we deal with the rest of the world, and doing something about health care and pharmaceutical prices. You need to fire up our base. Yes, they're fired up, but bring in moderate Republicans and independents, something I have shown time and time again I can do.
You've done it in the state of Minnesota, but there is a real tension there between the two sides of your message on Thursday night. On the one hand, you said that you want to be the candidate for those who feel stuck in the middle of the extremes in our politics. On the
And so that was the whole Kavanaugh discussion with Amy Klobuchar and ABC News' This Week. And if you go back and watch my debate clip roundup from last Friday afternoon, at a link down in the video description, you'll see I'm not a big Amy Klobuchar fan, but I can't really disagree with much of what she said there, and especially about the lack of investigation. And one of the things that proves it to me, and by the way, if you follow me on Twitter, or I'm at LiberalViewer on Twitter, and there's a link to my Twitter account down in the video description. I've spent the day, while I was working on my live clip roundup, I also argued with a bunch of people about the Kavanaugh evidence, and the kind of arguments I was getting are very similar to what you're going to hear from Ted Cruz, which is like total dodges, not dealing with what came up in the New York Times article today, or the upcoming book apparently. And like I said, because of my personal experience, I can actually refute something you're going to hear from Ted Cruz in this next and last news clip for the Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Like I said earlier, pretty much all he says in response to the questions about the allegations from Deborah Ramirez about what happened in Lawrence Hall at Yale, freshman year, old campus, place where I lived, 1983, 1984, you'll see Ted Cruz mostly say, Christina Blasey Ford, you know, like that was the only witness, the only accuser, and we heard her, and we interviewed some of her corroborating witnesses, and we didn't get enough corroboration. But the FBI interviewed Deborah Ramirez, but not the 25. If you read the New York Times article from today, or from yesterday, they interviewed Deborah Ramirez, but not the 25 corroborating witnesses. Max Stier, this additional witness that came up, the new accusation, he was never interviewed by the FBI. Some of the witnesses tried to get the FBI to interview them. And then the final thing, I can personally refute something Ted Cruz says based on my experience, since I lived in that dorm building in 1983-84 as one of the freshmen Ezra Stiles residential college member, Yale class people that year. I can tell you, when Ted Cruz says the New York Times and the authors of this new book went and they interviewed everyone who lived there. Well, they never interviewed me. They never tried to interview me. So Ted Cruz is lying in the final clip that I'll talk about with you a little more after we watch together over here.
This morning, and I do want to get to guns, but first, that breaking news that I spoke with Senator Klobuchar about, Justice Kavanaugh. You're a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee as well. What do you make of these new revelations coming from the New York Times, the calls from your fellow Texan Julian Castro to impeach Justice Kavanaugh?
Well, George, good morning. Good to be with you. I read that New York Times article this morning. You know, I got to say, they apparently spent 10 months with undercover reporters trying to track down every person that went to school with Justice Kavanaugh 30 years ago. You know, it's an amazing level of reporting, trying to just really dig up any dirt they can on the guy. I think that follows up with the rather shameful circus we saw during the confirmation hearing, where they took allegations, they sat on them, they didn't make them public, that they revealed them at the 11th hour. And you know what? The Judiciary Committee did what we should have done. We held a hearing. We invited the principal witness to testify. We heard it. The American people heard it. And at the end of the day, the American people made a judgment that the evidence wasn't there, the corroboration wasn't there. And I think this article just shows the obsession with the far left, with trying to smear Justice Kavanaugh by going 30 years back with anonymous sources. It really is another sign of how nasty and divided the time is today.
You say the corroboration isn't there, but one of the points the article makes is that 25 witnesses weren't even interviewed by the FBI, and a person named who was making allegations wasn't interviewed by the FBI at all. That's part of their point, that it wasn't an adequate investigation.
Well, to be clear, the allegations the Senate Judiciary looked at and considered were the allegations from Dr. Ford, the allegations of sexual assault that the committee rightly said, if this happened, this is a serious allegation. And we scheduled a hearing. We invited Dr. Ford to testify. We actually gave Dr. Ford the opportunity to testify in private if she preferred. Amazingly enough, she testified at the hearings. Her lawyers never passed that on to her. She said she didn't want to be in that public hearings, but her lawyers apparently kept that a secret. And what you saw is you really saw the Democrats, I think, taking advantage of Dr. Ford and turning it into a circus. You know, we saw a Spartacus moment in the middle of it, which showed just how ridiculous the entire proceeding was. But at the end of the day, we listened to the evidence. We listened to all of the potential corroborating witnesses for Dr. Ford. The FBI interviewed them, examined them. Their testimony did not corroborate her allegations. And the American people had a chance to look Judge Kavanaugh in the eye, now Justice Kavanaugh, and to hear his explanation. And at the end of the day, I think this is the New York Times just being bitter enders. And you know what? I bet you the next Democratic debate, they'll all be saying, impeach Kavanaugh, impeach Trump. There's nobody they don't want to impeach. And at some point, they just have to let the anger go and recognize that the democratic process actually moves on. And I think it's time for them to do that.
Let's talk about the democratic process in relation to guns right now. Of course, your state has been rocked.
And you want to see the whole gun debate with Ted Cruz? That's at the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos, link in the video description. But that was, I apologize for subjecting my viewers to both Ted Cruz and Kellyanne Conway in one program that I get, but you have to understand, I watched the whole interview of both those people that was the last of the news clips, and as usual, I watched all 5 news programs and taken out the best clips and added my commentary and criticism for your edification, education, information, and news understanding. I hope you appreciate that. Down in the video description, there are ways to support my program financially. I always like to point out on PayPal or Patreon, if you support me at the $5 level, you get this weather-resistant #LiberalViewer vinyl sticker. At the $10 level, you get the sticker and this ACLU Constitution. I can send those anywhere in the world. I sent one to Thailand recently. I just got a new Patreon patron in Puerto Rico that will be going out in the first few days of October. So if you like what I'm doing, if you want to support me financially, those are the best ways, other than sometime, hopefully in the next week. I said before the fall, and the fall's in the next week or so. But in the next week or two, I will be adding some additional ways to support my program using YouTube channel memberships. But anyway, look forward to that in the coming weeks. And you may have noticed I'm doing more in the middle of the week videos. I hope to continue that coming up. Not necessarily every week, but at least like half the weeks during the month. But before I finish the program, and I want to also give you the Dash and Sandy clip that I promised you. And here is Dash and Sandy at the water dish. And that's the clip of Sandy the dog and Dash the cat for the week. Sandy the dog is snoring over to my left. Dash is kind of, Dash heard his name and looked up at, there's Sandy, there's Dash. They're surrounding me for the, I don't know why Dash has now I have 2 live viewers in my studio audience, I guess, but I hope you appreciated the time I spent today picking out the clips. If you're wondering why it was kind of late, if you're one of the live viewers, I had several hours of ACLU of Northern California Board of Directors meetings during the day that I attended by phone, even though they were in Fresno. But all opinions I express here are my own, even though I am a member of that board for the rest of this year. This is the last of my 12.5 years serving on that board, and we just actually adopted a policy today that says that if you're on social media and you mention that you're on the board, you have to say, but all opinions I express are my own. So whose else's opinions would they be? But just my own. I'm just speaking for me here. But I will continue speaking for me this week and every week, every Sunday, and possibly sometime in the middle of the week in edited, produced videos. And until next week, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.